Could your personality be destroyed? I mean, really, truly erased? Today, we're going to look at what is, without a doubt, one of the biggest and most tragic failures in the entire history of mental health care.
So get this, a medical procedure celebrated with a Nobel Prize, the highest honor in science, was in reality a complete catastrophe, one that ended up destroying the minds and souls of thousands of people. So how on earth did this happen? Well, to understand, we have to go back to the very beginning.
It all really starts with one thing: pure desperation. You see, before we had this terrible, disastrous solution, there was an absolutely unbearable problem. And that problem set the stage for one of the darkest chapters in medicine.
I want you to try and imagine a world with basically no effective treatments for severe mental illness. Your only real options were to isolate people in asylums or use physical restraints. Patients were just trapped, suffering with these horrible symptoms. Families were completely overwhelmed, and honestly, doctors were pretty much powerless. Hope for recovery? There was almost none.
The pressure was just immense. You had families, doctors, and society as a whole who were all just begging for something more than just managing symptoms. They wanted a cure. And this desperate search for some kind of quick fix, some silver bullet, well, it created the perfect storm for a radical and, as it turns out, incredibly dangerous idea to take root. So just put yourself in that position for a second. If you or someone you loved was suffering with no end in sight, what would you be willing to risk for even a small chance at a normal life? That's the exact question that set the stage for everything that was about to happen.
And right into this landscape of complete desperation, a new, radical procedure appears. It was praised as a miracle cure, but here's the thing. It was built on a dangerously simple idea and a profoundly flawed theory. And this was the lobotomy. The theory, which came from its creator Egas Moniz, was that mental illness was caused by faulty wiring in the prefrontal cortex. You know, the part of our brain that handles emotion and reason. His idea? If you just physically cut those connections, you could cure the illness. It was a brutally simple, almost crude approach to the most complex organ in the known universe.
The speed at which this whole thing happened is just staggering. The procedure spread like wildfire all across the world, with almost no oversight. And then, in 1949, at the absolute peak of its use, Egas Moniz was awarded the Nobel Prize. This gave this catastrophic surgery the ultimate stamp of scientific approval. It was a disaster in the making. So, yeah, that Nobel Prize, that was the peak of the promise. But now, we have to look at the horrifying reality that was actually unfolding in hospitals all over the world. The gap between what was promised and what really happened was, well, it was devastating. The promise was calmness and compliance. The reality was a flat, empty, emotional dullness. They promised reduced aggression, but what patients got was this profound apathy. They couldn't feel real joy or deep sadness anymore. The procedure wasn't curing symptoms. It was literally erasing the person inside. Patients weren't being put back into society. They were often left completely unable to function at all. And the scale of this, it's just mind-boggling. Over 50,000 people in the United States alone had this done to them. That Nobel Prize didn't just validate the surgery, it hit the accelerator, giving it this false credibility that led to tens of thousands of destroyed lives. Now, here's a really crucial point. There were doctors who saw what was happening. They were sounding the alarm, reporting on these devastating changes in their patients. But these warnings, they were just drowned out. The desperate desire for a miracle cure, the momentum of the institutions, and of course the prestige of the procedure, it was all just too powerful. But eventually, the evidence just became undeniable. Long-term studies finally proved what the early critics had been saying all along. The emotional blunting, the loss of personality, these weren't unfortunate side effects. No, they were the direct, primary result of the surgery. The procedure only worked by damaging the brain. So, how did this era of, frankly, medical terror finally come to an end? And maybe more importantly, what did we learn from it all? It wasn't just one thing, really. It was kind of like a perfect storm of positive change. First, the scientific proof that this was a disaster became impossible to ignore. Second, a revolution in medicine brought us new antipsychotic drugs which offered a real, non-destructive alternative. And finally, there was a massive shift in medical ethics, one that started to actually prioritize the rights of the patient and the idea of informed consent. Today, the procedure is thankfully forbidden. It's remembered as one of medicine's absolute darkest chapters. And now it's used as a key cautionary tale in medical schools all over the world to teach future doctors about the dangers of scientific overconfidence and the absolute necessity of ethics. So, what should we take away from this whole horrifying story? Well, we learned that desperation can lead to absolutely disastrous shortcuts. We learned that we have to value long-term studies over what looks like a quick fix. We learned that the rights of the patient are everything. And we learned that the scientific community has a profound duty to listen to those voices that are raising red flags, to question its own assumptions. And that really brings us right back to today. As we continue to push the boundaries of medicine, searching for cures for things like Alzheimer's or other complex mental health conditions, this history serves as a critical warning. The question we have to constantly ask ourselves is this: how do we make sure that our own desperation for answers never, ever blinds us like that again?